struck appears to be struck in the head with a less lethal with a less impact munition, and the subject then fell to the ground and ultimately was transported to the hospital a short while later and is currently in critical condition in the hospital. This incident was captured on the Halo camera, and so we have a full video of at least one angle of what we can see. And I've had the opportunity to look at that and what happened during that incident. The victim of this incident was standing both out in the street and then up towards the curb area in front of police headquarters. He was standing next to another subject. The victim of this incident was video recording with his phone. And the subject he was standing next to at one point throws a bottle, appears to be a water bottle, at the officers in front of them up on police headquarters, the stairs. Everyone appears to run back for a second, and then they regroup. That subject then is wearing a backpack. He takes the backpack off, and a moment later, he does what appears to be a 360-degree revolution to get some velocity, and he hurls that backpack towards the officers that were, again, securing the police headquarters. Within a moment's notice after that, one of the officers fired their less lethal munition at that individual, apparently, but it struck this victim instead. And this victim then fell to the ground, and it appears as though he hit his head when he fell to the ground as well. A crowd of protesters picked him up and carried him under the 8th Street Bridge across the street from police headquarters. I believe they realized the severity of the injuries, and they were talking to officers about him needing medical help. They were given direction to bring him to the officers, and as is being widely reported and as is currently under review, it's reported that they were fired upon with less lethal munitions as they brought this victim towards the officers to get him medical help. I've seen pictures of a person that was providing medical attention to all of those engaged in these activities, and it appears as though she was struck in the hand with what she's describing as a impact munition. The victim of this case was brought through police headquarters and immediately loaded on an ambulance and transported to a local hospital. We immediately began a level 1 investigation into this incident last night, sending investigators to the hospital. And again, this investigation remains ongoing. We are praying for this young man and his family, and are hoping that his condition improves quickly. I know there have been questions about another incident that occurred on Saturday evening or afternoon. This one involved a young man between 15 and 16 years of age, a Hispanic male, who was on the berm on the side road on the east frontage of IH-35, I believe in the 800 block. I've seen the video where he is standing, and it appears as though he is struck in that video that I've seen on social media with a less lethal impact munition in the head, in the forehead. I know that we are investigating that case as well. We're trying to pull together all of our video, body-worn camera video, whatever else we may have to piece together what happened in that incident. And I would ask that the community in both of these incidents, if you have any video that you captured, because I know a lot of people were recording, please bring that to us so that we can include that in our review of these incidents. Our focus was on protecting peaceful, free speech and giving people the space to come out and express their concerns over what had happened in these incidents, as well as just general concerns with police-community relationships and other issues. And what we saw was others joined that group for means outside of that peaceful protest, and that's speaking against what had happened. And that's when we saw many acts of violence carried out, with objects being thrown at officers that were either protecting headquarters or in operations around the city. Officers here at headquarters had many objects that were thrown. They constituted bottles, rocks, fireworks, and the like. So this was protesting that we have not seen here before in Austin. We are a community that has embraced free speech. We are a department that has regularly participated in these free speech events, either marching with or giving space to those that are marching. And the only rules that we ever have is that we don't allow for any violence or destruction, but we will give the space necessary for our community to speak. We've also always had a rule that we do not allow people to overtake IH-35. That is the major interstate in our city, and when IH-35 is closed, that puts others' lives in danger because fire trucks and ambulances can't get to the places as quickly as they need to, or everyday citizens as well cannot get where they need to. So I know one of the incidents that is in question was yesterday afternoon when a large group of protesters took over IH-35, and we employed CS gas, which is commonly referred to as tear gas, but is a substance called CS gas, to disperse that crowd. That crowd was unwilling to move when given commands, and based on the experience from Saturday when they had overtaken IH-35 as well, and the lengthy process it took, and the confrontations between officers and those protesting, led us to believe that it was a much safer way to disperse the gas, the CS gas, and remove those protesters from the bridge. It was effective, and the protesters did quickly leave the bridge. I understand that it's controversial, and the visual of that is concerning to many, but we were looking at the best way to clear that crowd without having to physically engage with them, and with what we experienced the day before, what we thought was the best way to move that crowd, again, with the goal of opening up IH-35 for everyone's safety. What we saw was hours later, a group much larger than that first group yesterday overtook IH-35 again, and we sent a large contingent of officers up there again to remove these protesters from IH-35. And as they moved in and prepared to use CS gas again if necessary, as the officers placed their gas masks on, the crowd realized what the next step might be and immediately left IH-35. So again, that's all we wanted. We needed the protesters to evacuate and get off of IH-35. It is not safe for them. It is not safe for motorists traveling on IH-35 having to come to an immediate and abrupt stop because the road has been unnecessarily closed. So that was our efforts there. I know there's another incident where we have a African-American female, pregnant female, that is reportedly been struck with an impact munition to her belly, and that investigation is ongoing as well. We are looking into that. She too was brought into police headquarters and was rendered aid to ensure that she received first aid, and then was assisted by both medics and APD personnel. So that incident remains under investigation. This was a very difficult weekend to manage the protests as they moved around the city, and to try and limit the amount of damage, the vandalism, the looting that was taking place. I will update you on all of those, but again, the goal, the emphasis, the purpose of the Austin Police Department was to preserve the safety of those protesting that were out there trying to protest peacefully these serious issues. But unfortunately, we had people move into the crowd that were taking actions, dangerous actions against officers, and we had to respond and try and put a stop to that activity. I'm going to go over the questions now that you all have sent in ahead of this briefing, and in no certain order. There was a request for updates on the damage that took place, and what we saw was graffiti in many places downtown. If you drive around downtown, you will see graffiti on buildings across the downtown. We saw a significant number of burglaries and looting type incidents on top of that. These occurred in many parts of Austin. They occurred in East Austin. They occurred in the Mueller development, the Capitol Plaza area, the Hancock Shopping Center, 6th Street, as well as locations in Northwest Austin. We currently have investigations underway into many of these criminal acts, and as of today, there have been 13 arrests made for burglary of a building regarding these incidents. A question came in about APD officer injuries. There were 15 officers that were injured during these activities over the weekend. Minor injuries to these officers. We've had officers that were struck with various objects that had been thrown at them. The most severe was when an officer had an object strike his face shield. It cracked the face shield and hit the officer in his face, and that officer was transported to a local hospital for treatment and for stitches, but is okay. We had several other officers that were impacted by objects or twisted their ankles and the like, but again, 15 officers with minor injuries. We don't have estimates on the value of the item stolen or the amount of damage that's been done. And in regards to questions about the APD facility, as anyone that comes by and sees, it has been heavily graffitied on many sides. And so the city will work to clean that up along with the graffiti on so many other buildings as soon as possible. We are putting out the numbers of arrests daily, so I know you were asking about the number of arrests. The count from last night was 29 arrests, and that included 13 for burglary of a building. There were 3 for interfering with the public duties. There was 4 for theft, 1 for theft of a firearm, 2 for graffiti, 1 for engaging in organized crime, 1 for assault, and 3 for participating in riots, and 1 criminal trespass warning was issued as well. So those are the numbers from last night. Additional questions, what munitions were used by the Austin Police Department? We used pepper spray, which every officer carries as a routine part of their equipment, but then our crowd management teams carries that same pepper spray, but in larger devices. We used the less lethal impact munitions that I discussed earlier. These are the beanbag rounds that are deployed via a 12-gauge shotgun that has been modified to fire the less lethal rounds. We used the hand-thrown smoke cylinders on IH-35, along with the hand-thrown CS gas that I mentioned earlier as well. So these were the weapons that were used by officers. There's a question about policy. Our response to resistance policy is very lengthy, and it is on the public drive that you can go and look at it. But we do have specific considerations that have to be met for both the use of impact munitions and the use of any chemical agents, to include CS gas. And those criteria were met under the policy restrictions when they were used during this event. Again, having tragic outcomes in the few situations that we are aware of. And there was a question about whether any live rounds were fired this weekend. The Austin Police Department did not fire any live rounds from any type of duty pistol or rifle this weekend. The ammunition that was fired was that less lethal beanbag round that I talked about earlier. As far as department staffing, the entire police department has gone to the Alpha Bravo staffing model. And what that means is every officer is assigned to either the day shift or the night shift. And that gives us the maximum amount of resources possible so that we can continue to keep the city safe and hopefully see a stop to the looting and the tagging and the vandalism, but welcome the public speaking and the activism and the engagement on these issues that we should be talking about. We will remain in this Alpha Bravo staffing posture for the coming days, and will evaluate any opportunities to make change. There was a question about a citywide curfew. I have been in discussions with both the city manager and the mayor, and at this time we will not be moving forward with a curfew, but we will continue to evaluate that on a daily basis. I was in contact throughout the weekend regularly with both the city manager and the mayor, and had contact with a handful of council members as well. And we will be doing a briefing to our mayor and council this Thursday so that they will have an opportunity to be briefed on the occurrences from this weekend and to ask questions about the Austin Police Department's actions and policies and tactics. That again will be at this Thursday city council meeting. That appears to be all of the questions that were forwarded ahead of time by the media outlets. So I will open it up here in a moment for questions and remind you that in particular to those two incidents involving those young men that were each struck in the head with the less lethal rounds, those are both in the earliest stages of investigation. So other than, again, praying for their well-being and their families, there's not anything else that I likely will be able to add to what I've already told you. So with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Chief Manley, Jordan Bonke at CBS Austin. I wanted to ask, what is it that triggers a police to use a non-lethal round, or if it ranges into also using CS gas?
So again, I talked about our policy. There are several criteria. When it comes to the impact munitions, there are several criteria for that. And in this case, some of those criteria are whether there be riotous behavior, and it specifically spells out individuals throwing objects such as rocks, bottles, and the like. There are other qualifications or circumstances under which that munition can be used, but that is one that was particularly relevant to what happened over the weekend. And then along with there's reasonable suspicion to believe that the subject has already committed a violent crime and refusing to comply with officers. And then when it comes to the use of the CS gas itself, we have policies that govern the use of that item as well. And there is one where you're trying to restore order to a situation, and it would be more dangerous to make an approach and to engage than to try and handle that situation from a distance. That's one of the reasons among many that chemical agent can be used.
Chief Manley, this is Patrick Perez with KVUE News. Knowing that some bystanders were struck by these beanbag rounds, for example, will you be making any changes to any of your policies when it comes to managing crowds moving forward?
I've already met with my executive team first thing this morning to discuss our tactics and any changes that we should make based on the occurrences of this weekend. I've also reached out to other police chiefs, a few around the state, to talk to them about the tactics that they're using and what they're seeing as successful. So yes, we are thoroughly evaluating the tactics that we used this weekend to ensure that our current policies, training, and tactics are appropriate in this area.
Hey, Chief, this is Austin Sanders with the Chronicle. Have you identified the officer who fired the rubber bullet at the 20-year-old who's in critical condition, and do you know if the body camera of that officer was activated?
So just to clarify, it was a beanbag round, not a rubber munition. But no, at this point we have not identified that officer yet. We're going through all of the video to determine which officer that was, and then at that point we'll determine what we may have on his body cam. The video footage that we have right now is from the department's Halo camera that is mounted outside.
Chief, those two people who were struck, is it correct to say that APD fired at both of them, and is it also correct to say that both of those two people went through surgery?
I don't know that we can say until we have a chance to interview the officers the circumstances under which they fired in these individuals' direction. One does appear to be directly at the individual, that being the 15 to 16-year-old Hispanic male on Saturday. But as I described the incidents that unfolded last night with the 20-year-old, it was the person standing directly next to him that was throwing and hurling the objects at the police and I can't speak for that officer yet, but that will be determined is the direction and the aim and who they were focused on.
And
Chief Manley,
did they both go through
sorry, go ahead.
surgery? Did they both go through surgery, both of those victims?
I can't speak to their medical condition. I know that they were both in the hospital, and I'm not going to go into their medical treatment though. But the one from last night is in critical condition though.
And the pregnant woman, was she also transported, or was she not taken to the hospital?
I'm not certain if she was transported to a local hospital or treated here at the scene. We'll have to follow up with you on that.
Chief Manley, it's Patrick with KVUE again. I'm sorry. I know last night when we spoke with you, you said you were still trying to review the arrest reports from the weekend. Have you been able to determine how many people you arrested were not from the Austin area? And my second question, today Governor Abbott announced anyone who comes to Texas to participate in looting or violence will be federally prosecuted. Do you support that?
So on the, I'm sorry, the first question again?
Yeah, no worries. Yesterday you told us you were still trying to review the arrest reports from the weekend to determine how many people were from Austin and not from here. And so the question was, were there any people that you arrested this weekend that were not from Austin?
We're still pulling all of that data together, and we will put that out as soon as we can. As you imagine, there's a lot we're going through today on many different areas, and I know that information is important, but we're really working on some of these other issues first, but we will work to get that to you. As far as the comments from the governor, I had actually been in contact with the SAC from the FBI over the weekend as well, who informed me that the federal agencies were looking at that as well. And I do support that. I think if you are traveling to other communities and going to other states for the purpose of riotous behavior, especially when you're overtaking what is meant to be and what needed to be peaceful protesting and community activism at a time when we need it the most, I absolutely support that, because that is unacceptable when your purpose is detracting from a community that is trying to come together, is trying to heal, is trying to learn, and you're coming in and you are disrupting that.
Chief, it's John Engel from KXAN. Can you tell us if any officers have had their duties changed in response to their actions at the protests over the weekend, and walk us through how those investigations are taking place? You mentioned level 1 status on one of those cases.
So there is no duty status change that has occurred as of yet. These investigations, again, are in their earliest stages. So what a level 1 investigation means is that's the highest level use of force, or a use of force that resulted in the serious injuries that these two young men sustained. And so that is similar to what we do in an officer-involved shooting, in that our special investigations unit comes in and investigates those from a criminal perspective, and our internal affairs department will investigate them from a compliance department, to see if they're in compliance with departmental general orders. So those investigations are underway, and the Office of Police Oversight will be involved in those as well.
Chief, this is John Cooley with News Radio KLBJ. I have kind of like two-parter for you. As an Austinite, a longtime Austinite resident who's been in law enforcement, what's going through your mind, and how do you feel right now following the weekend? What's it like for you?
I'm crushed. I've cried a few times today. This was two very young people that we believe are from our community, but regardless of what community they're from, that are right now, one at least is fighting for their life, and the other one has been seriously injured as well. And that is not what we set out to do as a police department. That was not what we set out to do this weekend. Again, we were trying to ensure space for our community to come out and practice their protected speech, their First Amendment rights to speak out about these issues that we know are so important right now. And so it's tough right now. And I hope that I will have the opportunity to speak with both young men's families if they're open to that. But it's not just my heart that's grieving right now. It's the hearts of the men and women of the Austin Police Department, because this is not, again, what we set out to do. And this is something that that we are taking, as you would imagine, very seriously and looking into.
Okay,
Hey, Chief,
second part of the question is, there are now you're getting calls from the city council to talk about the response from the police department. Would you mind just giving us a quick overview or just, some initial thoughts of how you feel APD responded to the weekend?
Well, I've obviously talked about some incidents that did not go the way that they should have gone. I also saw during the same weekend our officers perform admirably under very challenging circumstances, trying to handle a very large group of protesters that unfortunately had been infiltrated by some whose intent was to commit acts of violence and vandalism. And so I saw tremendous acts of compassion and of really trying to give space. But I also saw times when we were at conflict, trying to manage the crowds and trying to eliminate the conduct that was creating the damage, or when the officers again were coming under attack with things being thrown at them, rocks, bottles, and the like.
Hey, Chief, it's Matt Largy from KUT. I wonder if you can just, in your own words, tell us what you're hearing the protesters calling for. Like I'm not talking about the looters and those folks, I'm talking about the vast majority of folks who are out there calling for change. What are you hearing from them?
Well, I think what they want is to have open, honest, complete discussions about the criminal justice system, about the disproportionalities that happen within the system, about the acts that occur sometimes in communities around our country where men and women lose their lives at the hands of law enforcement officers under questionable circumstances, and so many more things. I think this coming on the heels of what we see when a young black man can't go jogging through a neighborhood and look into a model home that probably many of us have done 100 times without having his life taken from him, on top of other incidents that have been occurring. I think that that the community wants to have those tough conversations, and that opportunity, I believe, was truly taken away from them this weekend, as evidenced by our local social justice groups that we have a good history of working with here in Austin, although it's difficult times now, that they backed out and chose not to participate in the march and the events yesterday because they feared the violence that had been talked about and ultimately some of the acts that we saw.
Chief Manley, I
And
know
how
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Sorry, I was just...
This is Andrew Weber from KT. You said that you're going to speak to the parents, the families of these two young men. What would you say to them now if they're listening?
What I say to you now is my heart is with you. I am praying for your child, and I hope that they have a complete and quick recovery, and I will make myself open to speak with you and answer questions.
Chief, it's Matt Largy from KUT again. How is this going to change your approach to addressing these issues? Do you have plans for how you're going to address some of the protesters' concerns about how policing is done in Austin?
Yes, and that's what we need to understand. We need to come together. This is a time when we need to be talking to each other, not talking around each other and talking about each other, but talking with each other, identifying the issues. I understand we have a very concerning critical incident that has occurred here in Austin with the Mike Ramos case, It is actively being investigated with our own department, as well as the Texas Rangers, along with the district attorney's office. So I can't really speak about that case, but I absolutely understand the concern that exists. We need to be sitting down and talking about ways we can come together as a community and do better and meet the expectations of this community and hear from them, really listen about areas that maybe we're not aware of, where we're coming up short, especially when we talk about disproportionate outcomes and the like. So that's where we need to be spending our energies instead of on handling these protests that keep popping up over and over again, that are really being held for motives sometimes other than what they're intended for.
Thank you all. This wraps up our briefing for today. Thank you for joining us, and if you have any other questions, reach out to PIO.